Aloha, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for Civil Beat's Ideas Live show for Wednesday, June 16th, 2021. We're really happy to have you with us. We're, as we always are on these shows, we're live, so we invite you to, over the course of this next hour, send us any questions that you have, any comments that you have. Today's topic is looking at the whole idea of introducing a criminal justice degree at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And we are joined by two professors from UH Manoa, Helen Yu and Meda Chesney-Lind are with us today. And they wrote an essay for us that ran in Civil Beat last month, looking at this question of offering a degree at UH Manoa. So that's what we'll be discussing today. Meda, in addition to being a professor at UH Manoa, is a former president of the American Society of Criminology, and we are joined by one of her colleagues in that body, the executive director of the American Society of Criminology, Chris Eskridge, is here all the way from Nebraska, where it is currently 103 degrees. Chris is a professor at the University of Nebraska, and we are also very grateful to be joined by Mark Patterson. Mark Patterson is the overseer of the Hawaii Youth Correctional Facility and is also chair of the Hawaii Correctional Oversight Commission. So we're happy to have all four of you here with us today. Thank you so much for being here. We like to start these shows by learning something about our guests. And since we're going to be talking about the criminal justice system and specifically about education, I would love to ask each one of you, since you are all involved in the criminal justice system in some way, to tell us a little bit about the journey that led you to become involved in the criminal justice system and about your own educational path within that system. So Helen, I would love if you would start us off today by answering the story or telling us the story of how you came to be where you are and doing what you're doing.
Okay, well, thanks, Julia. And hello, everyone. Again, my name is Helen Yu. I'm an associate professor and the graduate chair of the public administration program at UH Manoa. I'm also a veteran, but more importantly, from a practitioner standpoint, I'm a retired federal law enforcement officer. So I do have 16 years as a law enforcement officer, and that's pretty much what contributed to how I then pursued academia. So in my academic field, I have a master's degree in criminal justice, but I also have a PhD in public administration and public policy. My research interest as a professor has to do with the underrepresentation of women and racial minorities in law enforcement. So my research interest actually segued from my practitioner experience as a federal law enforcement officer, where I recognize the underrepresentation of women in law enforcement, but I also recognize the underrepresentation of people of color in general that are also underrepresented. So when I then transitioned to UH Manoa back in 2017, I was asked by our dean, as well as Meda, who's on this session with us, to participate in this task force to look into the idea of standing up a Department of Criminal Justice.
Okay, thank you so much. Mark, would you go next and tell us your connection into all of this?
Thank you, Julia. Appreciate it. I guess for those, Julia, this is a local broadcast, right? Okay. So, everybody, aloha. My name is Mark Patterson. I was raised on the west side of Oahu. We all know that's reputation. It is what it is. Of the 4 districts, I was raised in Makaha, the farthest district within the west side. When I was a young man, young boy, at 9 years old, I was fortunate to be chosen to attend the Kamehameha schools. And so that pulled me out of the environment, and I drove 50 miles a day to go to school in Honolulu. And that kind of changed my whole path, as opposed to my cousins and siblings that remained on the west side. Upon graduation from Kamehameha, and understanding that, Kamehameha has a legacy from the Princess Pauahi. And we were, as graduates, we are told for everything that she has given to us, your life journey will return back to her, what she had given to us. And so 9 years of my early education was at Kamehameha upon my graduation. Being from a military family, I attended the New Mexico Military Institute in the junior college, one of the oldest military institutions west of Mississippi, I guess. And it was an experience, and it was there that I began to take criminal justice classes. Yeah, that's when the interest began. The interest for me was federal law enforcement at the time, and I had hoped to become U.S. Marshal Service. That was my joy. Upon graduation, I ended up at Florida State University. And a lot of that was because they were known for their criminology department.
Yeah.
And I can remember for extra credit, we could protest against the governor, who at the time was known as Barbecue Bob Graham. Yeah, and if you folks know, Florida had a real mean capital punishment law. Yeah, and so they were still using the electric chair when I was at Florida State. And so we would participate in those gatherings to oppose those decisions at the time of death penalty. So eventually I came home, and Ronald Reagan had froze all the positions in the federal law enforcement, so no one was hiring, and the only one that was hiring in Hawaii at the time was corrections. And they just got through building a brand new prison. And so I was hired as soon as I returned back to Hawaii. And I loved it so much. And I looked upon it as my life goal to give back to the princess by helping the Native Hawaiian who were in the criminal justice system. And I've been doing this for the last 34 years.
Wow.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Mark. Meda, I'd like to come to you next. What
Sure.
has your journey been?
Oh, well, thank you, Julia, for helping us with this. We're just all delighted to be here. I guess I'll start my story. I was in graduate school at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and I was looking for a topic for my master's thesis. And my then mentor, Jean Cassabaum, had gotten all the files, all the juvenile court files from the Hawaii juvenile justice system from its inception up until the mid-50s. And I think I asked a very fateful question of a colleague of mine who was going through the files and coding some of them. And I said, do you ever come across girls' files? And he said, oh, every once in a while. And I said, well, would you put them in a box for me, Dutch? And he said, sure, no problem. That was it. I got into those files, looking first at the amazing interest that we were just going from beginning to end. So I was reading the earliest court files about girls, and I was just amazed at the official interest in girls' sexuality, whether they were virgins or not. In the 20s, they literally gave girls exams to see if they were virgins or not, and they reported it in their files. So that launched me initially into a long career looking at girls and women and the criminal justice system. And I've got a couple of books out on that topic. One on girls and gangs, another on the female offender, another on girls in the juvenile justice system. But it started with that question. And I was drawn to that question because I was in the women's movement, and there was always this two questions that you asked. One was, what's missing? What's missing from the information we've been given about our history? And then the second question was, what about girls and women in whatever situation you're exploring? What about women? And so it was amazing. And I think, like all of the colleagues on the call, I discovered my passion, and I did a fair amount of work nationally on this issue. I'm probably well known nationally for that, but I also developed a passion because I was here in the islands for looking at our unique crime problems. And I got involved. I was very fortunate to get involved with the Office of Youth Services, looking at particularly youth gangs in Hawaii. And I worked on that issue for probably 10 years. And learned a lot about the neighborhoods. Mark mentioned one that he grew up in that's pretty tough, and tough for the kids who grow it. And you could see that the life chances for kids that are born in places like Waipahu, Makaha, Kalihi, they're pretty grim, and especially for the boys. It's very interesting in some cases for the girls, especially Filipinas, because they have that role model in their families of being nurses. You see this amazing divergence between Filipino males and Filipinas sometimes in the same family. So I've enjoyed doing the work that I've done in Hawaii, and I continue to do that. And I guess what brought us all here today is we'd like to strengthen the resources, especially at UH Manoa as the flagship campus. We know that there are strong programs in the community colleges. There's strong program at UH Hilo. My friend Marilyn Brown taught there for many years. I hope she's still plugging away out there. But I do know that Manoa needs, as the key and largest campus in the system, this resource. So again, so appreciative to be here, and thank you for hosting us.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, we come to you. We're so grateful that you came all the way from Nebraska. You're 5 hours time zone, but we would be honored to hear the story of how you came to be involved in the criminal justice system.
Thank you very much, and obviously appreciate the opportunity to be in Hawaii today. Had a chance to visit Meda and her husband in their lovely home about 2 years ago, pre-COVID. Looking forward to coming back.
That's right.
My father was a professor of medicine, of some renown, by the way. If you wear contact lenses, he was the inventor.
Wow.
I was going to follow in his footsteps. I quit school between my freshman and sophomore year of college, and I went and lived in the Philippines. It was in the midst of the Vietnam era. Ferdinand Marcos was the ruler dictator, and I experienced firsthand some of the political atrocities in which he engaged, and even more so, the genocidal activities against the Islamic community in Mindanao, where I lived for a period of time. I came back into a very chaotic environment, Vietnam protests and the like. My roommate, my uncle, who was the chief of police, said, "You ought to take a criminology class." I had no interest in doing so, but I did. Enjoyed it. And in the midst of the bachelor's degree and thereafter, as I say, I carried a gun. I was a law enforcement officer in a number of capacities. After a period of time, as my joke goes, I traded my gun in for chalk. Safer, but I don't know the way schools are today. I'm not sure that's the truth anymore. But I moved in and out of the arena for a period of time, pursuing graduate work, and then took a position at the University of Nebraska. I have, though, for many years, still kept my finger in the pie as I did work at the county and at the state level, white collar crime investigation, and then continued for all these years to assist various agencies here in the United States and abroad with some white collar crime thoughts and perspectives. The scams that the people pulled years ago, they're coming back. Officers ask me questions. So, "Oh, we didn't learn those in the academy," and it's because it's the old stuff that's coming back. And as we all know, the perps are always one step ahead of us. And we're always trying to catch up. So there's my story. Thank you for asking.
Absolutely. And I wonder if we could maybe just talk a little bit, Meda and Chris, since you were both very involved in the American Society of Criminology. Can you tell us a little bit about what that organization is and what it does?
Chris, I'll let you handle that one.
All right. The American Society of Criminology began in Berkeley, California. 1941 is the year we say, and it was really the brainchild of sorts of one August Vollmer, who was, many would regard the father of American policing. And the organization has certainly morphed over the years. Different entities have split off and the like. Today, with some self-aggrandizement, I guess, we are the premier, the leading criminological society for the eggheads, for the academics in the world. We hold an annual meeting. This year will be in Chicago. We did not hold one last year. Nobody did. Normal attendance would be 4,200, 4,300 people from 60 countries. We work very closely with the European Society of Criminology. We actually help them get started. The Asian Criminological Society, we help them get started. We work with some of the national entities. We help get the Pakistani Society of Criminology started, for example. Oh, I left out Australia and New Zealand, excuse me.
That's right.
It's an excellent organization. We don't view each other as competitors in any way, but help and assist advance the field, advance the knowledge base, aid and assist where we can. There's a great group that we're meeting in Honolulu next February. I'd certainly urge you all to go. The Western Society of Criminology. This was a group that split off of the American Society amicably years ago. We're very close, very good friends. We're the big ship, and so we provide a little economic support for that, just as a token of recognition. There's another entity, the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences, tends to be a little more policing oriented, a little more on the practical side. ASC is probably 80 to 90% academics, 10% practitioners, 10, 15%. About 40% of our members are PhD students, the up and coming. Meda, you and I got to watch out.
Yeah, right.
We're ready to take our place.
Chris, can I just...
That bodes very well for the organization's academic future, as the tremendous interest from the young.
Can I just ask you to, just a little bit more? You say you advance the knowledge base. Not to spend too much time on this, but what sorts of things are we talking about here? Are you working on policy? Are you working on research? When you say it's largely academic, but what is its value?
Contribution to the knowledge base.
Yeah.
I'll speak, then Meda, you can go ahead.
Yep, absolutely. Sorry.
We have 11 journals within the American Society of Criminology. The leading journal in the world is Criminology. We also publish a journal, Criminology and Public Policy. We have 18 divisions, and some of those are young divisions. They're just getting going, but half of them have journals, newsletters, web pages, where we reach out, help and assist practitioners as well as academics to grow and develop the field. There's a very important job that we have to connect with justice agencies, with departments of corrections, Mark, to aid and assist as best we can. Sometimes it's difficult to get policy passed because it doesn't fit. I worked in the legislature in a state as a legislative aide, and it was so frustrating to see solid pieces of research ignored, just absolutely ignored by the politicians. You need to have that nickel to put in the slot machine, or excuse me, in the jukebox, maybe a slot machine too. They'll sing if you can stick the nickel in, but it has to be more than a nickel nowadays. It can be a great record, but you got to have the money, and that's very frustrating at our end. But at least we advance the knowledge base. And I'll say one more thing. I'm very much an advocate of Max Planck, the German social scientist who won a Nobel Prize, not social scientist, but a scientist, I should say. And he felt progress was delayed by one generation. As the older farts die off, the young who have been educated come and become the new rulers and regents. And they have that new knowledge base, but then they are the old And my wish is the Max Planck paradigm does not continue, but that we might be able to see progress within a generation, not wait until the new generation comes aboard. And that's why I'm so thrilled to see 40% of our members be PhD students.
Okay.
I'll be quiet, Meda.
No, that's fine. Keep going, Julia.
All right. Well, so let's talk about I know that we're talking today about education within the criminal justice system and training within the criminal justice system, but of course it incorporates the whole system and progress. So I think what I would really love to talk with all of you about, you come at things from such different perspectives, is what is the progress that is needed within the criminal justice system? And then that's a large question. And then very specifically, let's talk about how a degree program at UH Manoa would contribute to that. Really looking at what exists currently for training in Hawaii on the ground, and how this would augment that, support that, and then how that in turn would provide us with a more just and more humane criminal justice system. That's a big, big question. Helen, I don't know if you perhaps want to start for us with what you currently see existing within the UH system and why you are an advocate for a need for more.
If it's okay with you, could I answer the first part of your serious question, and then
You can answer whichever part. I know there were a lot of parts.
So I think most people know that for the past, since the Johnson administration, we've always been talking about criminal justice reform. So that term is not new. But just as a refresher, back in 2014, President Obama did stand up the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. So even though police reform has been around for, again, decades and decades and decades, it has generated much more attention when President Obama stood up his task force. And that was, of course, in response to, the killings of, African-American, persons, by the police. So as part of that, that's one of the reasons why, at least my research interest had to do with women and racial minorities. Now, moving forward, to now really answer your question, what we had noticed, because this is a dialogue that has been generating a lot of attention, and this was something that the leadership of UH Manoa had recognized, this is where, when we stood up our task force, and Meda, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this task force stood up maybe 6 years ago.
Close to it, yeah.
It was 2 years before I even got here. And again, it was something that was looked at as far as, what is it that UH Manoa could do to kind of play a role in this national dialogue of, criminal justice reform. And one of the things that we had noticed was the fact that we do not offer a concerted and dedicated criminal justice degreed program. Now, as Meda has said in her introduction, we are aware of, supporting other institutions, on islands, surrounding islands, that have similar degree programs, but we do not have one at the flagship, UH Manoa. So with this criminal justice reform dialogue that has really caught a lot of people's attention, and with us now as a flagship not offering that degree program, we feel that the training, some leadership, might be missing from those individuals, who want a bachelor's degree, a master's degree in this field, and then who might be interested in a field such as policing, probation, corrections. Those might even be interested in go to law school, and et cetera, right? So that's, I think I'll just stop there to see if anyone else wants to jump in.
I'll happily just second what Helen has said. We know that Hawaii, back to the challenge of that Hawaii faces in the criminal justice system, we know, and certainly recent events have underscored the challenges in policing here in the islands. And we have also got challenges in our prison system that they've been under scrutiny, our jail has been threatened with lawsuits and has had lawsuits. So, you know, we have a lot of indication that our folks that are in the criminal justice system are maybe in need of help and support. And what I'd like to say here is just make another little distinction that I think is crucial. We do have at UH Manoa some very strong courses in criminology, particularly in the Department of Sociology. And I'm a criminologist, you know, that's for sure. But people like myself tend to study the causes of crime. So I got involved in girls' crime, you know, what causes girls to run away from home, what happens to girls and women who get into the criminal justice system. Those are the kinds of questions criminologists tend to study. What we are lacking and what Helen and I are arguing needs to be added to that are programs that will help people who are in the system basically as workers, because we just don't have resources here. And Hawaii's isolation makes it even tougher. And I'll maybe pass it over to Mark after that, because I know he had to go to the mainland to get some of the training that he needed. We need to stand up those resources here in the islands. And I think in line with some of Mark's other comments, we'd like to have values that are consistent with the ethnic groups and the values of our place, and certainly the home culture, involved in how we rethink or how we invent and reinvent both, you know, policing, probation, parole, and corrections. And that requires resources, and it requires academic resources, but it also requires people like the people on this show, maybe serving as adjuncts to a criminal justice program to teach some of those courses. I think that's a criminal justice program that really borrows from, and I know Chris can speak to this too, the resources that exist in our community. So it's an exciting opportunity, a kind of town gown thing. So we anticipate that if we were able to stand up this program, we'd be able to draw students from a lot of places here to the islands, but we'd also be able to better reflect in our policing, corrections, courts, the values of the various ethnic groups that are here. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Mark, I would love to bring you in at this point, because you have so much experience of working on the ground in corrections. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you feel is needed. What have you witnessed that you felt have been valuable to your coworkers that they didn't get, that it would have served or helped them to get?
I'm going to kind of back up a bit of what I've just heard, and hopefully I can answer that in what I had planned to say right now, Julia. But I'm going to back up before the crime. Yeah, when we talk about social issues and mental health issues. Okay, so when you look at the University of Hawaii with the School of Social Work, you know, they're pumping out a lot of social workers. Yeah, a lot of them end up working for the Department of Human Services and on many of our nonprofits. And they bring the learning from the school, they're getting their master's, and they're learning social work and they're applying it in the community. Same thing can be said for psychology or sociology, those individuals who end up working for the Department of Health. Now, of course, social workers end up working for the Department of Health along with psychiatrists and psychologists, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so the university are producing those staff persons and providing in-house training as they go up their career paths. Okay, the missing component is the criminal justice system, and I say that's the missing component because when intervention has failed in the Department of Health, when intervention has failed in the Department of Human Service, public safety becomes the dumping grounds. Yeah, and we don't, and we're overcrowded. We have like 400 or 500 people at OCCC because they can't pay $100 crime because they're homeless. Yeah, because mental health and human services has failed in their intervention. There is no interpretation of DHS knowledge into public safety. Yeah, criminal justice system will allow an academic approach to the issues that are currently occurring in the Hawaii system, and bring together the academia to have the solutions in place and to train the people who are currently in there and the next generations coming up. The key to the next generation coming up is that too often we hear evidence-based programs. Yeah. Julia, the evidence-based programs can be as far away as the East Coast. And they're bringing it to Hawaii for individuals that have been raised in our valleys and on our shorelines. And sometimes they say it works, sometimes it doesn't work. My question has always been, where are our evidence-based programs?
Right.
Where are the things, not just the Native Hawaiians, just local people? The mix that is a result of 200 years of people coming to Hawaii. Yeah, not everything we do here is the same as the continent. Yeah, our thoughts are different.
Yep.
No, for example, I went to Louisiana and walked into a secured correctional juvenile facility, 200 beds. Every crime was murder. Youth facility. We don't have that in Hawaii. Yeah, we don't have kids with guns. We don't have kids. Well, you know, unless the media puts it, but they have it so much that it's a statistic.
Yeah.
And they're going into prison. We still will divert them from the prison system, you know, in terms of the juvenile. Our juvenile system is moving great in terms of reform. Yes. But that's kind of where I'm at right now, is really providing a means to teach the local population and even others coming in about who we are as Hawaii and what can be done differently in our criminal justice system. And bringing the missing element in to work with the Human Service, to work with the Department of Health to resolve those issues. I hope that answers your question.
That's perfect.
I want to jump in, Mark, because I couldn't have said it better. And that ties in with the notion that we talked of earlier. There's a European Society of Criminology, an Asian Society of Criminology, Australian New Zealand Society of Criminology, because you need your own evidence-based research. And we figured out a long time ago, what works in Philly ain't going to work in LA, and certainly not in Hawaii. So that is one absolutely essential component that's missing in Hawaii. Because you need to get your own freaking evidence-based work done. And start your own Hawaiian Society of Criminology. To bring people together that have those specific social, cultural dimensions and activities that can be examined and reviewed. Absolutely, unequivocally, yes, yes, yes.
I would just want to add that when we do have the resources and the leadership in our Hawaii system, we do have nationally known programs. And I'll just talk about two. One is Judge Steve now he's our prosecutor, Steve started a Hope probation program that became nationally known and was replicated in many communities. And I think, especially in Hawaii, the program was very successful in part because it really functioned as a therapeutic court. It was not a punishment-oriented court. So Hope Probation is one national model that grew up here in the islands. The other was Judge Karen Radius working on a project called Girls Court. And I was fortunate enough to be involved with that and ultimately did an evaluation of it, which it's one of the OJJDP best practices. So we know we can do this, but as Chris has pointed out and Mark has pointed out, you know, as one of my colleagues said to me, he said, Meda, you can do what you're doing out of the back of your garage. You need a department of people to be able to do this responsibly. And I that's it. And as I leave and go into emeritus status, that was my thought is I'd like to, you know, do one last push to see if we can't, you know, fulfill this obligation that I feel we owe, the University of Hawaii at Manoa owes to the state.
Can we talk a little bit about what the course offerings, what the curriculum of this degree program might look like, bringing in this idea that it should be Hawaii specific, that it should be a program that is going to train people who are then going to be able to, whether it's based on evidence-based research or just a deeper sense of place and sense of awareness and sense of understanding of the culture that can then be brought into the criminal justice system in Hawaii. How do you accomplish that? What would this degree program consist of?
Helen, I think it's your turn.
Okay, so as I believe Meda has already indicated in one of her earlier statements, I mean, we do have criminologists and world-renowned criminologists, Meda being one of them, at UH Manoa. But as I love the way Mark indicated, this missing element is a very CJ-centric, which they are complementary fields, but they are two distinct fields, right? One does study with crime, criminal justice has to do with the operations and systems, of the criminal justice system, which is policing, courts, and probation. So we do recognize that we do have some of those offerings, right? Some of those offerings here already. But as Mark very eloquently, indicated, it has a different spin on it because of the individual, who may be teaching it. So anyway, so to get to your question, so yes, I mean, we would have classes such as an intro to criminal justice, right? Which is different than something else that we would have. We would also have a focus on criminal law, perhaps use the Richardson School of Law to assist us with that. More very specific dedicated courses on the CJ system itself, course, probation, policing, law enforcement. Then perhaps offer a research methodology course, again, focused on criminal justice issues, or social issues, geared towards the criminal justice system. Most definitely we would have internships. I mean, that's almost like the bread and butter of a CJ program, is the internship that would go into specific criminal justice organizations, as opposed to like social work and, those types of organizations. And then we would have, complementary fields or electives, as I would say, that would be unique to Hawaii. Because I know that in our discussion as a task force, that has existed for 6 years at UH Manoa, that was the one thing that was always mentioned was, yes, we can use a model of a CJ, of a very successful Department of Criminal Justice on the mainland, and we can certainly, borrow some of it, but we also would want to cater it to what is unique about, the state of Hawaii. And that way, some of our electives would be geared towards some of the specific issues that we would have. So I'm explaining that very broadly, of course, but some of that we do have existing expertise, at the campus, which is great. But we also know that in order to make this a reputable department, right, incredibly reputable department, we know that we also have to hire out and hire actual professors with PhDs and in a criminal justice degree. So while we have some skill sets on island, we know that we have to bring in new folks. But that's just kind of a broad description. I don't know if Meda, if you wanted to add on to that.
I was thinking Chris could add on. You have the University of Nebraska, sort of a flagship campus in many ways, in terms of a criminal justice program. Why don't you rattle off your thoughts?
Yeah, please tell us how it's working, how it works there.
We've had a program here for more than 50 years. We know enough to be dangerous, I guess. But one part you mentioned, Helen, really caught my eye and my ear, and that is the internship. My recommendation is you basically make the internship a required capstone class.
Absolutely.
Some can't because they're already working. And so you have to have another option, but have it be required. Now, the advantage you have is the advantage I have. Lincoln is the capital. And I'm the internship coordinator. I have more than 50 different agencies in the city of Lincoln where I send my students. And Meda, you had mentioned town and gown.
Yeah.
If I don't send someone to the state police, they call me. Chris, where's my intern? Chris, where's my intern? Now, yes, they're getting free labor, but they're also checking kids out to hire them. And they
Right.
get advertising word of mouth, because when I go into a classroom and I have 2 to 3 minutes where I'm getting my act together, I hear the kids talking. And yeah, they're talking about their date last night at the ball game, but they're often talking about, what did you do there in the prison last week? Wow, did you know this happened, this happened? You're on a parole matter, this happened, this happened. And so the students are educating themselves. The professor isn't even teaching, but the students are teaching each other. They're listening to each other more than they listen to me anyway. And so that internship is a crucial, the anchor, the main component to get out of that stupid classroom and get out there and actually do something and apply what you learned in that type of an environment. Everything else you said, Helen, I'm in agreement with. You got to have the gen ed stuff. You start with the CJ 101, you have a police, of course, corrections. Not that ours is the best by any thought, but I'm happy to share with you our curriculum. The Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences has a sample curriculum. By the time you get that junior senior level, you got the terrorism, organized crime, organization management theory, violence, victimization, depending also on the expertise of your faculty and the adjuncts who might come in. A white collar crime class, of course, would be pretty common. About 20% of our students want to go into law, or majors, the law. And so you have that. Since I'm rambling, let me mention 2 other thoughts. One, part of the academic program is extra credit. And you want to bring in speakers to the university and have them at the student union. And you bring in the heads of the Department of Corrections. You bring in the Chief Justice. You bring in the Attorney General. You bring in the top people. And you have them make a presentation open to the entire university with a little punch and cookies afterwards. I get these people actually asking me, Chris, you haven't asked me for a couple years. I'd like to come. Federal judges. Wow. You got a capital city there. And so they're going to be able to be very easily come to the campus and make presentations. And besides, let's be honest, some of these are political folk. This is a great PR gig for them. And you tell the media that they're going to be speaking. And so, come on, let's be open here. Then you need a CJ club. You don't invite the hotshots to the CJ club. You invite the line level people, the people that the students can relate better with, the people on the street, the fresh probation officer, not too fresh, but how do I get your job? And the kids relate to that. You know, I want your job. What do I got to do? And these 30-year-olds are saying, yeah, I was just in your seat just a short time ago. Here's what you need to do, man. Here's what you need to do. Boy, the excitement, the kids go crazy over that stuff because they can see, oh, okay, one day I could be an AG, but today I just want to work in the AG's office in the white collar crime unit. What do I need to do to get there? So that's part of the curriculum, is to have these other programs and activities that are there that just build in an effervescent fashion, in a synergistic fashion for your program that you have.
You know, I'd love to ask you, Chris, if, you know, these internships, this openness, these presentations, are there ways that you feel that you have witnessed that it has actually improved the criminal justice system's functioning in Nebraska as a result? What?
Absolutely. Because the people that the police departments and the corrections departments hire are people that they then screen out and they pick the best. And these kids then learn and they bring the classroom into the juvenile justice facility. They, oh, I learned of this new study. And so you find that the heads of these agencies are our former students. And so they, oh, there's a new study. We'd like to learn about it. And so there we go back to evidence-based. You bring in people who are interested in improving, achieving, accomplishing, achieving excellence. And that brings a level of effervescence into the agency, not just the knowledge base, but their attitude that they bring in. It's just, it's infectious. I got a call from the sheriff just last week saying I need some kids. I got some people retiring. I'm a baby boomer. You know, you gray haired are retiring. I need some good, exciting, solid kids coming in. I don't want a kid with a 4.0. I want to, what else do they have? I don't want, what else have you done other than just get that 4.0? And you semester abroad, internships, done these other things, military. I want somebody who's sharp, who's coming into my agency.
Julia, I just wanted to pop one thought in. I know we're heading into the running short of time moment. And one of the things that I meant to mention earlier in terms of the challenges that face us in Hawaii and our criminal justice system, and Mark alluded to this earlier, is the issue of Native Hawaiian overrepresentation. Basically, our Native Hawaiian population is overrepresented among those that find their way into the juvenile justice system and the criminal justice system. And that overrepresentation becomes all the more acute when you look at the prison, both the youth training school and our prison system. So back to the challenges that we face here in the islands is the wrenching issue of how do we get, as Mark said, how do we do a better job of starting off the Native Hawaiian kids who can't make it to Kamehameha? How can we enrich their lives and all opportunities so that we don't have this terrible scourge in our criminal justice system? And so and OHA did an excellent study of that about 10 years ago. They want to fund another one because they want to see if anything's gotten better, but we can't leave this topic without mentioning that issue. And that's why Mark is so critical, because he's a professional in our system and he's also Native Hawaiian. So he brings both the local and the global perspectives in.
And I had actually wanted to go from Chris to you, Mark, just to hear your reactions and thoughts to what Chris was saying and how you think that would work on the ground in Hawaii.
I want to make a statement that some may agree or may not agree, that I heard coming out of LA in many discussions that have been going on right now involving structural racism. Yeah. And they said, police officers, for the most part, aren't racist. Unfortunately, they go into systems that are. Yeah. And because the systems and the structures that they become a part of they fall into the system's process and procedures. Yeah. So when I first heard that, I was like, wow, that's pretty deep, and looking at the Hawaii situation here where, the inmate population mirrors the correctional workforce. The inmate population mirrors the law enforcement. Yeah. We're family, literally, and you try and think about, well, if we know the individuals all know each other, what is wrong with our systems? Yeah. And so how do you change the systems when you have a legislature that's very stubborn? Like what you said earlier, you have all the information, but nobody wants to do anything. We don't have a nickel, internships. Let me back up. To be innovative in the state system is difficult. You can't
Speaking from experience.
when you can't assign people to do things. Yeah. Innovation for me is the interns. Yeah. It's to bring this intern in and share an idea with them, see what their passion is, and move with the innovation. And they begin the foundation for which I move the innovation. It was interns from the University of Law that changed the Hawaii Youth Correctional Facility to the Kawainoa Youth and Family Wellness Center. I got an intern out of the School of Social Work to do research on how we would have homeless shelters for minors and young adults, 18 to 24, kids who are aging out of the foster care system, the judicial system, that have nowhere to go. When she graduated, she formed a nonprofit and she's managing those programs right now on my campus.
Wonderful.
So the internships are a viable resource in how we use innovation and change the system to what can work. Yeah. I can just go on and on, but we need to have that element at the University of Hawaii.
Yeah. I want to, we've gotten many comments from our viewers. And so I want to share some of these because they've taken time to join us today and they've written them in. So we so appreciate it. And some of these you may want to comment on, and I'll just share some of these. Here's from Dr. Arnold La'anui. I like the idea of a criminal justice program. He says, but what we are really talking about is a larger pipeline in human capital development. Toward that end, have you considered deeper partnership with both high schools and employers? So that's one thought. Here from Donna Madrid, she says, aloha e from Hilo on Hawaii Island, Hawaii Community College, UH Maui College, and Honolulu Community College have excellent AS in Administration of Justice programs that make great feeder programs. At Hawaii Community College, AJ Club signature activity is career conversations that host local criminal justice professionals and advocates that is very popular with AJ and non-AJ majors. So it sounds like some of what you were talking about, Chris, is already happening on the ground in Hawaii, but maybe not at UH Manoa, Helen and Meda? Is there anything like that happening in Manoa now?
That's the void. As you know, we can certainly borrow from our sister campuses. Both Helen and I know what's being done. We did an inventory of the various programs, and certainly I have good friends and colleagues who teach at UH Hilo and or have taught in the past at UH Hilo. They were a part of an earlier write-up that we did when we were trying to say, what do we need at Manoa that we don't have? On the issue of the pipeline and looking at high schools and looking at employers, well, certainly we're looking at a system that needs employees and needs trained employees. And that was what we saw as a void, is that right now we have, you know, certainly the police department has a training academy, but that's a 6-week program. Department of Public Safety has a 9-week program. So, you know, there are resources that exist in the community and in the systems, but they can be enriched, as Mark pointed out, by what we're proposing today. So and I certainly agree with the structural racism question and the challenges that presents our system to try and look at police accountability, given some of the problems that have developed recently and the overrepresentation of Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians among those that have been the victims of excessive police force, including lethal force. So, you know, as I say, we've got the challenges the mainland systems have, and, you know, the university has to step up and help our colleagues in policing, in the police work, and we have to step up to help our colleagues in corrections and bring the latest thinking to them, bring interns to them, you know, do our part to improve the system. I better stop and let Helen or somebody else talk now. Chris, well, maybe.
I'll just, maybe I can share another comment here from Rachel. She's saying Mark's point about public safety being a dumping ground is so on point. The gap occurs between prevention, intervention, and the punishment aspect. The gap consists in part of switching perspective from restoration to punishment. So I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that about, you know, how it is, what is driving the placement of people into the system and the way that they are treated once they get there.
Well, certainly the kids start in foster. I mean, my friends who are judges in the family court will show me files, and they'll show me first the file that the child had in the child welfare system. Judge Wong used to do that. And then she'd stack on top of that the file of that same child as they got in trouble in that system, which doesn't work well. And there they are in the juvenile justice system. And, you know, as Mark knows, because he's run adult facilities, there they turn up again in the adult facilities. We saw many of those kinds of very sad stories, and particularly in the Native Hawaiian community, the Samoan community, to a lesser degree, the Filipino community, but poverty is a part of the picture here in addition to racism. And we have to enrich the resources available to the kids and families in communities where resources are poor. And we already know that from COVID. We know where the COVID rates are highest, and, you know, where the poverty is the greatest. And those are the same kids that fall out of the schools and into the detention centers and into the prison system.
Julia, you know, when I was at Florida State, there were distinctively 2 tracks, law enforcement and corrections. Yeah. And law enforcement is pretty cut and dry. A lot of the professors came out of the law enforcement field, and they taught public safety, and they taught how to enforce the laws. That's really cut and simple. Corrections, depending on the university, it's going to take whatever turn that university feels, whether it be conservative or liberal, progressive, etc. Yeah. What I've always talked about here in Hawaii, and what this school can afford, is really the mentality that they're going to get out.
Yes.
Yeah? Right now, we're just putting them in there because we don't know what else to do. So we put them in there without thinking about what they're going to get out. And so we're not investing in the getting out. We're not investing in the re-entry. And the problem is we don't have much knowledge in that area because we don't have the academics in that area. We can quote the mainland continent, but we can't quote Hawaii because there's no real legislative effort to work on the getting out. We will build a $750 million jail, but we won't spend a couple million to figure out how to get out.
Right. And how to stay out.
And how to stay out. That's the issue. Many of our local offenders, that one time in is enough. But if you don't provide them the opportunity when they get out, then they go back in. We are so accustomed to media and thinking of all the worst case scenarios, the murders, the serial killers, the molesters, the rapists, and we put that on the entire population. When there's a large population in there that may not be considered as public safety issues.
Right.
They're probably more nuisance. So how do we focus on the getting out? And that's what academics can provide us right now.
Thank you.
You know, is the ability to come up and say, this is what we found. That the transition from the interventions from our social services systems are leading into public safety, and we still haven't found the answers. And they're ending up back on our streets.
Yeah. Chris, I'd love to ask you, in Nebraska, do you look at this issue of rehabilitation, re-entry, what is needed and necessary and actually works to help people who have gotten out stay out?
Well, sure, every state does. The problem, what pollutes this whole discussion, is the politics. And so we have a right-wing governor in the state of Nebraska, very right-wing, very much almost Trumpian. And so we moved in this country beginning 30, 40 years ago to a mass incarceration orientation.
Right.
And so we can talk about things at the operational level, but at that strategic level, there is an attitude of lock them up, throw away the key. And so that goes back to the Max Planck paradigm. To really see change, we've got to see change in a perspective. I did look it up. We talked about it yesterday. About 65% of the students who take criminology classes at the University of Nebraska are not majors. They are not minors. They are taking classes out of interest. And so one of the great roles that we would have as eggheads, as academics, is to educate the young in things that work, to move away from this horrific mass incarceration model that we slowly moved into, really starting pretty much the Reagan time, and continued now for 40 years. And so that strategic element has got to be in place, or else all our efforts and all our research will be for naught. Because the legislators who are voter conscious will be scared to death. I'll even pick a very hot potato, and I'll even add a dimension here, a little self-aggrandizing, but the death penalty. I mean, that's a quintessential example of a political issue that people are scared to touch. I'm a former homicide detective. Before we knew who Ted Bundy really was, I spent a night in jail with Ted Bundy because he killed someone. It was my case. And I could admit it now because he's dead, and it was totally illegal, but I was trying to get information. We couldn't use it in court, but we were scared. So I dealt with homicides that were carried out by motorcycle gang members in a horrific fashion. but I am a former homicide investigator, and I'm against the death penalty because for so many different reasons. But you think I'm going to win office in Nebraska by making that statement?
Yeah.
And so we have this political component that just overshadows our efforts at the ground level to achieve and accomplish what we'd like to achieve. And the research that is often done, as we have already talked about, that nickel in the jukebox.
Mm-hmm.
A politician, how's the saying go, Meda? Politicians use evidence like a drunk uses a lamppost, just to lean against for illumination.
Oh my. Yep. It's frustrating.
Well,
So Julia,
that's a very kind of deep question about, how is it that the United States has more incarcerated people than any per capita than any nation in the world? And how is that not considered a national tragedy and a situation that simply cannot be allowed to continue because it represents such incredible pain, suffering, and distortion?
It is a national tragedy, and our international friends look at us as the quintessential hypocrites. We have 4% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prisoners. And then we look at it in a racial context, and it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific, but it doesn't play well in America. And perhaps these 65% of our students who are not majors, but are just taking the criminology as a gen ed, it can reach into their brain tissue, reach into their soul, and perhaps a generation from now, we will begin moving in a proper direction. But it's going to take some time because politics is like a major ship moving. Good luck stopping that sucker.
I'll just briefly add to what Chris said, which is so important, that mass incarceration arose in part because politicians like Reagan, like Nixon, going back even that far, used crime as a code word for race. And everyone understood that if you were going to be tough on crime, you were really nudge, nudge, wink, wink, talking about locking up brown and black people in America. And mass incarceration has really been about the new Jim Crow, about ways to control and marginalize African American, and in our own community, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander populations. It's a disastrous element of the race problem, which has haunted America since our inception as a nation. So dismantling it is a challenge, as Chris said. And we as criminal justice professionals can document the racial disparities. We can also, to the degree that we can do this, tease out things like, was it just that they committed the crime and more people of color commit crimes? And no, the very fine research that's been done on this says no. The answer is it's about racism and structural racism at that. So we don't have as good data on programs that work. Mark is exactly right. That's the kind of research academics in a criminal justice program would undertake to do. We want, we just want, as we've got other world-class programs at the Manoa campus in astronomy and physics, we don't want to neglect a field whose elements really haunt the American landscape. And right now, Hawaii is at a crossroads. We can either build the jail that Mark mentioned at a phenomenal expense, or we could, for a much lower amount of money, talk about a more modest jail and then funding the community programs and funding the academic programs that will build out a criminal justice system that really focuses on the point Mark made, which is getting out and staying out. What are the reentry programs that we need? We have reentry committees, but we don't fund the programs. And yet suddenly we have a governor and Governor Ige who wants to build a massive, it's the largest public works program ever undertaken by the state of Hawaii. We're going to build, for you local people, it's the correctional equivalent of the rail system. It's going to be a disaster. It's going to cost us a fortune. We could take those monies And our legislative task force recommended this. Put the money into the reentry programs, put the money into services, look at the whole system, spend your money in smart ways. Don't just build a giant facility out at a jail in Halava. It makes absolutely no sense.
Okay, I want to, we've gone a little over an hour now, so we'll close up soon, but we have many more comments and questions. And Helen, I'd like to bring you back into the discussion. Here's a question. One of our viewers is asking, what are your thoughts about creating curriculum for this criminal justice degree that can address the national climate around reshaping the criminal justice system, specifically around the push for police reform? So this is a question that we've been touching on throughout this conversation, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, Helen, specifically as it relates to this proposed program at UH Manoa.
Okay, so, as I mentioned, earlier on, I mean, part of the reason why this task force was created at UH Manoa was because of this dialogue on UH reforms. But if you actually really go into all the recommendations that were made by President Obama's task force on 21st century policing, I mean, they made, I might be off by one or two, but I believe they made 58 recommendations and so forth. Now, I can't list all of them out. And to be totally honest with you, there are really only about 5 that I personally, as a researcher, is interested in. But one of the things that I will mention, that I know that I would be interested in bringing up, partly because it's my research background, is the lack of women in these criminal justice professions and the lack of racial minorities into these professions. Now, with women, it's a little bit different, but when we talk about racial and ethnic minorities, to kind of piggyback off of what Mark has said earlier, now that's not the solution to fix all. Okay, and we know that. I mean, we know that because, as Mark was alluding to, there are structural racism once you get in, because if you are already a racial minority and then you join a police force or a correction force or whatever, and then you are also still a minority, then there's also some kind of struggles into it or whatever. But research has shown, I mean, the research is actually mixed, to be totally honest with you, but the research has shown that, there are some things that, that by improving the makeup of an organization, it does can improve it or whatever. So to go back to your question, that would be one area of reform that that we would be interested in, because again, we have existing faculties into it. But again, there were 58, 57, 58, 59. Chris, you may know it right off the bat. I mean, but it was that amount of numbers or whatever. But with a dedicated, stood up Department of Criminal Justice with faculty, focused on CJ issues, they would be tackling these issues from the national standpoint and then bringing in the local piece into the curriculum. So it's hard for me to answer it directly, but I'm trying to still answer the question.
Sure. And I think just that idea, maybe even of what are the unique things from Hawaii, the unique perspectives that could then be taken and actually be of value to on the continent, to within the rest of the United States.
Yep.
I just real quick, I remember, only because I've had friends that were in the police department back in the 90s, the West Coast counties were coming to Hawaii and raiding the police force because they wanted police officers who were trained in multicultural techniques. And basically, I put a quotation to training because it's more or less they were raised in a multicultural society, so they were looking for a particular type of officer, and they said Hawaii had the best ones. So they were offering them big money, and HPD had a huge gap of officers flying to the mainland after they got their training.
Wow.
Right. We do have an ethnically diverse police department, but also corrections. So that's a strength that Hawaii has, as Marcus noted. Right.
Okay.
I think we mentioned this in our essay, but HPD in particular is the most diverse police force in the entire country. I mean, that is actually a fact. That was collected by the Bureau of Justice Statistics. So HPD is the most diverse. However, while they are the most diverse, they are still underrepresented in racial and ethnic minority officers. So I do want to be clear. So we may be the most diverse, but we are still underrepresented.
Right.
Don't get me started on the underrepresentation of women, but that's another topic.
Thank you. Thank you, Helen.
We'll do a show on that. Oh my God, that's not just criminal justice. Okay, so I want to close. We have the questions, both Jennifer Shiro and Scott Spalina. They're coming at the same point in slightly different ways. Jennifer is asking, how close is this program to realization? Will it be a standalone department like interdisciplinary studies, or will it be housed in a college like social sciences? And Scott, also wondering about how close it is to realization, is asking, what has been the major obstacle in creating this program at UH Manoa? If it is cost, how much money would it cost to create the program? And can the UH budget handle it?
Well, a couple of things. Yeah, as we got to the issue of resources, that's where things stalled out. In other words, we had a proposal, it was going through, technical terms don't need to be thrown in here, but it was going through the process of trying to establish the authorization to plan the program. So it's not going to happen next month, but we ran into the resource issue. It became clear that, the kind of, they were very excited, I think, initially, that because we had so many good criminologists among our faculty, and we identified, I think, some 28 faculty at Manoa that have at least some degree of expertise. They thought, oh, good, we can just, put a label on a door and have a program. Well, that's not going to work with criminal justice. As Chris has noted, this is a program that if you put that, label on the door, you could easily have 200 to 400 majors in a very short period of time. So we need to stand up a strong program. That Helen and I felt that very clearly. And that meant we needed new resources, not existing faculty, all of whom had other positions and other teaching responsibilities, but new faculty in this proposed field. And that hit first just the fiscal realities at Manoa when budgets were declining. Then we hit COVID. But we're coming out of that, and the UH budget does not look nearly as grim as it was feared. So, I think we're hopeful that and we weren't asking. Helen, can you remember how many positions we were initially asking for? Was it 3?
3 the first year, then another body the second year, and then it was to increase. But the way we had built the proposal was we were going to use existing faculty as
yes,
to augment the faculty, but to answer one of the attendees' questions, it was always designed to be a standalone department. So while we do have, again, quite a few faculty, to include, Meda and myself, to obviously augment, that missing piece are those faculty with a PhD in criminal justice that does specific, CJ research and so forth, to bring a little bit more credibility, obviously, to our standalone department.
Okay. We're well over an hour now, so I want to close out today's show by offering each one of you a chance to offer any final thoughts. If there's anything more that you feel like needs to be said, anything that we haven't covered, or just a point that you want to reemphasize. And Chris, since your day is drawing to a close sooner than ours, I want to offer you the opportunity to go first and share your closing thoughts with us.
We started a criminal justice program at the University of Hawaii in a summary context. You got a short-term and a long-term perspective. In the short term, you're going to be able to send people out there to the streets, to the facilities, interns, prepared students who have an attitude of excellence to deal with the problems that exist now. But there's a long-term value as well. And that long-term value is you're going to educate large numbers of students who will be the leaders and the rulers and the regents of tomorrow to address these more strategic issues that we struggle with. And a footnote, I looked it up. A year ago, before COVID, our department generated $3.6 million
Wow.
in tuition revenue.
Yeah.
Tell the chancellor that.
Yep.
All right. Meda, can we come to you?
Sure. I just want to thank Julia for hosting this and doing such a splendid job. And to, Chris and Mark especially, thank you so much for coming and joining Helen and I to broaden the conversation and give it the kind of depth I knew you'd bring. So I just want to say mahalo to everybody, and let's hope this keeps the conversation going.
Helen, what would you like to say?
I think my closing comment is, we know from university student surveys, that students are interested in a criminal justice degree. We know that for a fact from university surveys. We also know via the state legislature that there is a state need for a criminal justice major. In fact, they have asked us to look into it. So the way we would look at it is, we are hoping that Manoa, we basically feel that Manoa owes it to the state and the community to offer this degree program.
Bravo.
Thank you. Mark, we'd like to close with you.
As the chair of the Hawaii Correctional System Oversight Commission, we're mandated to manage and assess and evaluate constantly the overpopulation of the system. We're asked to look at complaints from the community and from the offenders themselves, and to investigate allegations. We're also asked to look in and evaluate, assess, and inspire the reentry program. Overall, our mandate is to cause reform, to begin reform from a punitive system to a therapeutic system. Yeah. One of the first things that we can support that can allow us not just to start the reform, but to sustain it, to build a foundation and to sustain it, is to allow the University of Hawaii to create an academic college of criminal justice. We need the people to manage the reform. We need the knowledge to manage the reform. We need the research to manage the reform. If we can do that, by the time my term is up, I can say I helped do one thing.
Thank you.
Knowing the vastness of what the mandate is. I don't know if I can do it all in a short period of time, but if we can get the school going, we can sustain a reform effort. Thank you, Julia.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Mark. Mahalo. So I really want to thank all of you for being here today. I think this was a very powerful discussion, and you each brought so much to it. So thank you so much. I want to thank our viewers who stayed with us, and who sent their comments, who sent their questions. I want to let you know that we'll be back with the next Ideas Live show on Wednesday, June 30th. We'll be looking at how we can improve the health of Hawaii's nearshore ocean waters. That'll be at 2 p.m. That discussion. And just really so many thanks to all of you. I feel that such important, we're discussing just such important things in this conversation today. So, and it feels very alive. Thank you all. And mahalo for joining us. Aloha.
Mahalo, aloha.
Bye. Aloha.